Welcome to Wisdom and Beyond. Today we have a topic very different from most of our topics, and it's a topic about which I know very little. But it's very interesting to me, and it has to do with reproductive rights and support and our faith. And it's really, in my opinion, a program that supports women. I want to say that I'm not endorsing this. I don't endorse any medical procedures of any type or any medical institutions, but I think it's an interesting story. So here today we have Ron Rack, who's the president and CEO of St. Peter's Hospital and Medical Center. Is that right?
And St. Peter's Healthcare System.
And St. Peter's Healthcare System. I'll get it all right sooner or later. And here we, or not. And here we have Dr. Nolte, who's a family physician, who is the founder and director of the National Gianna Center for Women's Health and Fertility at St. Peter's Hospital. But it really has to do with St. Vincent's in New York, and it's a long story. And here's the bottom line. The program that they have developed supports Catholic women of faith who want to limit or increase, depending on their situation, the size of their family in ways that are consistent with the teachings of the Catholic Church. Did I get it?
You got it.
Okay, I got it.
However, I would say that it is open to women of all faith, and beyond being simply an approach to family planning or infertility that's consistent with the Catholic teachings, it is also consistent with high medical standards, and we actually see it as an alternative to traditional treatments of infertility. And so in some sense, and in the real way, it's not simply pro-Catholic, it's definitely pro-women.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But the really interesting story is how this all came about.
Yes.
So will you tell us a little bit about who is it, the woman for whom this is named, who became a saint, and then how all of this happened?
Sure. St. Gianna was an individual who was going through a very difficult pregnancy and died on Good Friday in 1962. She had a choice. She either could have aborted her child, or she could have gone through the pregnancy and actually suffered, and eventually her own life would have been threatened. That did happen. She chose the life of her child over her own, and so she was canonized in 2004. Mm-hmm. And so the center was named after Gianna.
Okay, and she was a pediatrician, right?
Yeah, she was one of the first female doctors in Italy in the 1950s, so it's just, I don't know, the perfect role model for the saint. She was a young professional woman. She was known for being vibrant and full of life. She had 3 other children. She herself had experienced 2 miscarriages, and then she was also known for her incredible charity in her work as a doctor. Okay. So again, really brought together everything that we believed.
So we're going to start with talking a little bit about how the Gianna Center came about and how Dr. Nolte chose to dedicate her life to this program, and how Ron was involved in making all of this happen. It's a pretty interesting story, so let's hear it.
You want to start all the way from birth? Or
no, let's start at birth.
Okay. I'm the president and CEO of St. Peter's Healthcare System.
But you have an interesting background.
I do have an
Let's
interesting
hear
background. I'm a lawyer by training. I practiced law for 20-some years. In 2001, I decided to leave the practice of law. I was a partner in one of the state's largest law firms. I was a litigator. I represented not just the Catholic Church in certain select matters, but also the gaming industry and the Department of Insurance.
That's an odd grouping, but we won't go there.
They're all a gamble.
They're all related. They're all a gamble. Okay.
In some sense, they really are. But in any event, I had always had an urging to enter the priestly vocation. And so I made the very difficult choice in early 2001 to leave, a very prosperous practice of law and enter the seminary. I was accepted by the Archdiocese of Newark into their seminary. I was to begin seminary studies a year later. When you decide to enter the priesthood, they give you 1 year to really discern the vocation. So I took a year off. I spent most of my time here in New Jersey, where I'm from. I also spent a large amount of time in Rome, really contemplating what I wanted to do. And my family was very close to a cardinal in the Catholic Church. And he, when he was elevated to the rank of cardinal by Pope John Paul II. My family was with him that day, and we were having dinner afterwards, and my family had announced to him that I was going into the priesthood. And he asked me to walk back to his residence at the Vatican, and as we walked back that winter evening, he turned to me and he said, you know, you're getting a little older. I know sometimes you're a little impatient. Do you really find yourself back in a school setting? He said, because there are other ways you as a layman can serve the church. And believe me, I feel there is a time coming in the church in America where they will need lay leadership. I returned back home to the United States. I spoke to my family about this. I'm not married, obviously. And I decided to pursue work with the church on the local level. At the same time, a longtime friend, Bishop Paul Bukowski, was named the Bishop of Metuchen. He asked me to come work with him on administrative matters and legal matters. I did that. I became the administrator for the Diocese of Metuchen, the first lay administrator in the United States. By virtue of that position, I was a board member at St. Peter's Hospital. From there, I ran both the diocese on an administrative level and also counseled the bishop on the hospital matters. And then eventually I was named chairman of the board. In 2007, I became the CEO of St. Peter's Healthcare System, which I had formed 2 years earlier, combining our children's hospital, adult hospital, and outpatient services, and here I am today.
Wow. And St. Peter's is under the Diocese of Metuchen.
Yes, St. Peter's Healthcare System is the only freestanding faith-based Catholic healthcare system in the state and one of a handful left in the country, meaning we are not part of a large religious congregation. We are not affiliated with an out-of-state corporate office. We report directly to the Bishop of Metuchen, and therefore we maintain our independence.
Right. So, Anne, you grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, right?
Right, Amish country.
Yes.
Although I am Catholic.
Okay. Went off to college and medical school. Where were you in medical school?
I went to Thomas Jefferson University, which is in Philadelphia.
And then you have a story. I think the interesting story is how all of this came about. So we know we have this Saint Gianna, and you found your way to New York City against your wishes, but you found your way there. Now you're very happy that you're there, right?
Yeah.
And so how did you two get together, and how is it this Gianna Center is at St. Vincent's and here at St. Peter's?
Sure.
And what does that mean anyway?
Yeah. Well, when I was in medical school, I had always been very devout. My faith was always very important to me. And so when I went to medical school, I knew that I wanted to follow Catholic teachings. I didn't want to prescribe birth control. I didn't want to do abortions, and wanted to follow my faith. And in the course of my training, I was told by teachers, professors, classmates, I had no right to be a doctor. I had no right to go into women's health, which was what I loved, serving women. And so in the process of that, people were always asking me, well, if you don't believe in birth control, what are you going to do for women? What are you going to do if they don't want to have a baby? What are you going to do if they have a medical problem? And so I began researching the answer to that question because I wanted to serve women, but I also wanted to be faithful. In the process of doing that research, two really interesting things happened. One, I learned about the Creighton model and NAPRO technology, which is the service that we offer at the Gianna Center. But I also began to hear the stories of Catholic women, and it was really striking to me. Young women who were waiting until they were married to become sexually active, practicing abstinence, would tell me that they would go to their physician and be mocked or laughed at or told that their choice was unhealthy. And then women who wanted to have large families were similarly being mocked by their physicians. And I couldn't believe it, that physicians would actually mock them. But as they told me the stories, women would say, I was having problems with natural family planning. I took my chart to the doctor and he threw it in my face and said, I don't know anything about that. And so on the one hand, it became clear to me that even though it's only a very small group, this is a group of underserved women.
Right, and even if you didn't have the experience of someone mocking you or telling you that you're wrong, the great thing about this country is that we each have the right to practice our faith. And these women were trying to practice their faith
Yep.
Without any medical support, or
Correct.
much medical support. I shouldn't
Correct.
say any, but
Correct.
but without support where they tried to meld science with their faith.
Correct.
Right.
And so in the process of both trying to figure out how to help and be of service to these women and also answer these questions for myself, I learned about the Creighton model and naprotechnology. And essentially, 40 years ago, an OBGYN looked at natural family planning and said, a 20% failure rate's not acceptable. Let's perfect a method. And so he began doing intensive research into the way the woman's body worked. And at this point, the Creighton model, which is a natural family planning method, is as effective as any hormonal or other birth control out there, 99.5% effective at preventing pregnancy.
But I read years ago about, when, for example, IVF, that the percentages of effectiveness were quite low. I mean, do you mean it's 99% as effective as IVF? Because I don't think IVF is 99% effective, right?
Well, two different things. The first thing they were trying to do was prevent pregnancy. Teach women a natural way to prevent pregnancy.
Okay, so they were not trying to...
This was not in the infertility
okay, so
area
this
yet.
was just...
Exactly.
So they reached
This
that
was-
percentile
exactly.
rating on what, when I was a kid, we used to call the rhythm method.
Right, the rhythm method. What do you call a Catholic who uses natural family planning?
Mom.
Parents. Right, that's the joke. Parents, you know. It's fun. You get to hear all the jokes when you do this work. But they perfected a natural method, no hormones. Women can space their pregnancies, so Catholic families can have a large family if they want to, but they can also have a small family if they want to.
So there is support for people who want to follow their intimate life and their faith.
With their faith. What was amazing was as they were doing the research to perfect this natural family planning method, the charts that women would keep of what was going on in their cycle began to show abnormal patterns that could give a clue that there would be an underlying problem with infertility or put them at risk for miscarriage. And so from this natural family planning method, they developed an entire health model for taking care of women's health problems. Infertility and miscarriage are the most exciting areas, but irregular cycles, polycystic ovarian syndrome, the menopausal time, all of it, we realized that this natural family planning chart is a phenomenal diagnostic tool. So just like your cardiologist puts a stethoscope on your chest and by the sounds can tell you have a leaky valve. When a woman brings me her natural family planning chart, I can look at that, and there are women I can tell before it ever happens that she's at risk of having a miscarriage. I mean, it's phenomenal.
Without measuring the hormone level.
Even without doing any testing. But in addition to that, the chart, because it so accurately tells you what's going on inside the woman's body, can then be used to do a much more focused evaluation of her reproductive system. And that's how we use it to treat infertility. So we do offer an alternative to infertility. That's the kind of exciting, glamorous part of this, because we have a true, compelling alternative that really seeks to identify the underlying cause of why a couple is not conceiving and then correct it so that that couple can then conceive through natural intercourse, which is the Catholic Church prohibits IVF, in vitro fertilization.
Right.
And effectiveness rates are comparable.
Interesting. So how did this come about? Because there's a great story, I think, as to how it came to be both at St. Vincent's and at St. Peter's. How did this happen?
Well, it was approximately 2 years ago that I decided to go into New York City after St. Vincent's had closed, along with my chief medical officer and chief academic officer, Dr. Katari. And we went into New York because I had decided that it was a terrible thing, in my opinion, that with the closure of St. Vincent's, there would be, in all of New York City, no longer a Catholic healthcare institution. And so we went in really looking to see if there were any medical programs that were, in essence, going to be orphaned because of the closure of St. Vincent's. Dr. Katari and I arrived at what was at once a thriving hospital. It was shocking to see empty hallways, medical devices just thrown on the floor waiting for someone to come and take them out. People standing in line looking for jobs because they had like a personnel department there that was helping people try to find jobs. And when you looked at this empty building, I just imagined to myself that there must have been a multitude of services that were provided to this community that no longer would be provided. And I was particularly interested in any service that was faith-based. After talking to the acting administrator at the time, Dr. Katari and I were told that there was a program called Gianna. It was operating in Midtown Manhattan, and I was asked if we were interested in going to visit the office. So within seconds, we decided we were going up there. We traveled uptown. We met with Dr. Nolte, Dr. Biter. I think my initial impression was they were looking at me basically thinking, what is he doing here? I think there was a little suspicion as to
Did he
why.
come to close us down?
Why, exactly,
Well.
exactly. I mean, I was that terrible healthcare executive once
Right.
more looking for something that was profitable, and if it wasn't, I'd shut it down. And we talked, we learned more about the program, and in the car ride back to New Jersey, I turned to Dr. Katari, and I said, Nyan, this is a program that has to be saved, and this is a program that has to grow.
And why did it need to, and it
Why did
needed
need to be
saving.
saved?
Can you
It
tell us
did
a little
need
bit about that?
saving. Yeah, from a faith perspective, this was completely a journey of faith for, I think, everybody involved. It originally started, I was in my last year of training as a family medicine resident, and I had done extra training in women's health, but did not have a grand plan to do this. But basically, a wealthy, pro-life private citizen from Manhattan got in touch with me, knew that I was interested in these issues, and said, if you'll come to New York City to start a Catholic women's health center in Midtown, I'll pay for it, up to $1 million. And so initially, I actually said, there is no way that I will ever move to New York City, because I Lancaster, Rolling
Right.
Hills.
I'm with you.
We have buggies.
Hey, look,
we
you're
don't have
talking to a girl
traffic.
from Ohio.
Right, exactly, you know. But I really felt like God was calling me to do it. And so I figured out how to put together a business plan, created a website. We had a waiting list of 120 people. And then 6 months before we were supposed to open, the stock market collapsed in 2008. And the sponsor notified us and said he could no longer fund it. So actually at that point, a second donor had heard what we were doing. He said, I can't fund as much, but if you keep going, I can give you a little bit to get started. A few weeks later, St. Vincent's Hospital, then the last Catholic hospital in New York, they had heard about it and said, we don't have anything to offer women like this, so come on board, we'll fund it. And actually with their funding, I was able to recruit Dr. Biter, who is an OBGYN, also NAPRO trained, and the two of us opened the center together then in Manhattan in December of 2009. And then 3 months later, St. Vincent's went bankrupt and closed after 160 years. And I will never forget, as it was starting to happen, the hospital was saying, this is being blown out of proportion, we're not, don't panic. But one of the administrators called me to his office and said to me, you have 48 hours to become independent, get your license, raise the money to stay open. Otherwise, there's nothing I can do to help you. Because the first round of layoffs was going to be the next week, and we were going to be part of that. And so actually that day, I walked back up to the office. I felt like I was on a reality show, right? 48 hours.
Right.
And I just thought,
or on the Titanic.
Yeah.
Only I don't think they had 48 hours.
Well, yes, exactly. It did feel a lot like that. I thought if God wants it, it will be. And so I walked up to the office, I was opening my mail, and in the mail was a check for $100,000 from another donor who had heard about it a year before, forgot the name, and then 3 weeks before remembered it and sent that to us. So we were able to become independent. We stayed independent for a year, really supported by donors who believed in the mission, but we were getting to the end of that funding, and honestly, we're within about 2 weeks of closing, and again, just thought, okay, I'm going to start to do what I need to do to close it because there's no more money, and then in walks Mr. Rack and Dr. Katari. So within weeks, actually, they had already begun to support the practice, and then we came on board officially with St. Peter's. They opened a Gianna Center on site in New Brunswick in November of 2010, and then we came on board in New York in May of 2011.
And I could say when Dr. Katari and I arrived back in New Jersey, the first call we placed was to Bishop Bukowski of the Diocese of Metuchen. And he said, definitely, let's go for this. Of course, given my position, I also had to meet with our medical chiefs. I had to explain, to the finance individuals, how this would work. And I can honestly say there was a lot of skepticism in the room. Would this really alienate individuals who came to us? Would this be seen as competition with, traditional fertility services? And I was very adamant. I said, we're not going to look at the bottom line yet. This is a faith-based initiative, and this is why we are here. We deliver more children than any other hospital in the state of New Jersey. We have a neonatal intensive care unit that is the largest in the Mid-Atlantic states for high-risk individuals. And it was a natural fit. Now, Providence has shown it was also a very good financial decision, but it was really a decision driven by a recognition of our mission. And I was also driven to it, quite frankly, because ironically, a few weeks before, I'd gotten a phone call from a family friend who was panicking because her niece had gone to a fertility clinic and she was mortified because that morning she had gotten a call to come to the doctor's office. And the doctor said to her, I have very good news and I have very bad news. The good news is that you're going to have quintuplets. The bad news is that 3 of them should be eliminated today. And there were 4 boys and 1 girl. And he said, start with the girl and then pick the other 2 from the boys. She was panicked. She called hospital after hospital. I dare say she also called so-called faith-based healthcare providers in this region. And every one of them suggested to her that if you reduce the number of infants, will help you. They finally called me, realizing, yes, I think Ron does something in healthcare. I had the individual come up to our hospital. She was seen by our physicians, and those 5 children were born. 1 eventually passed away naturally, but the other 4 today are 2 years old, 20 pounds each, and ironically, the healthiest of every one of them and the most active is the girl, who she was told had to be eliminated. And so with that personal experience also in mind, I knew that we could provide that full compendium of women's services and children's services at St. Peter's, and a large step in that direction was the acquisition of a practice such as Gianna.
Well, it's really interesting to me. I mean, I do love the part that women of the Catholic faith can find services that are consistent with their faith. I feel that way about men and women of any faith, that they can find, if they can find medical service. But the Catholic Church has always been sort of leading in medical care. I do believe my first 2 children were born at Holy Cross Hospital in Salt Lake City, Utah. So there you go. And delivered by a physician who was a professor of my husband's at the time. So, so the Catholic Church has always been leading, and now we have this whole big corporate medical system. There are some pluses to that, some minuses, I'm sure. Just as there are pluses and minuses to everything. But what I'm happy to hear you talk about is that you guys have made a choice to offer an alternative. Yes. But what I really like is something that you said earlier, that you sort of see this as your ministry. I think, I'm in the business of talking about hope and the importance of contribution and all of these things where we know that when we work in the welfare of others in ways that are authentic to us, that is the greatest life that any of us can have. So I would say for the 2 of you, I think you've found that in your own life. And this is your mission and this is your ministry.
And I constantly remind, our physicians, our staff, and so forth. And by the way, what I'm most proud of St. Peter's healthcare system is, number 1, we treat people of all faiths and no faiths, and we employ the professional services of individuals of all faiths and no faiths. And yet, whether a patient or a physician or staff member, they universally say that there is something about this institution that brings about a sense of caring and compassion. And I use that to explain to anyone I can speak with, is that we are not simply providing health care, but we are continuing a ministry. And it's a ministry that began when Jesus walked the earth. It's a ministry that began when the disciples, began to heal individuals at the gates of Jerusalem. And I was reminded the other day that, when Jesus actually sent his disciples out, what did he say to them? He said, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, heal the sick, but in the process, tell mankind that the salvation of the kingdom of God is at hand. What was he saying? He was saying, you just don't perform this function, but you perform it in a way that people can see a greater good and can see the face of God. And years ago, I was called downstairs to our oncology unit, and I had just become the CEO, and I had no idea what was happening. I thought it was another internal crisis. And I was called down there because the vice presidents had arranged the wedding of a woman of Jewish faith who had only a few weeks to live. And she was in her early 20s. She was marrying her high school boyfriend. And the staff had arranged the wedding. They hired a rabbi. They bought her a gown. They brought her flowers, and we were the witnesses to the wedding. She died a few weeks later, but her stepmother from Florida was a writer for a Florida newspaper in Palm Beach, and she wrote a wonderful article that someday I'll share with you, in which she talked about how it was in a Catholic healthcare setting in a place called St. Peter's in New Brunswick, a family that had lost their faith, their Jewish faith, had found it again.
That's
and they
great.
found it in the faces and the words and the kindness of the people who were there. And she said, if you want to find God in a healthcare setting, go to a place like that. This is what we're about. And this is why we're so happy that Dr. Nolte would come.
Right, I agree with you. I think I love how you approach this as your ministry. I come from a secular position here, right? But I will tell you that if you look at the research in many topics, even leadership, you see that in the secular world, in the leadership research, in the psychological research, in the spiritual research, great leadership is about developing the potential of the people around us. So you can take that and go wherever you want to with that. And I will say to you, good for you for finding what you love to do. And good for all of us if we can be in a position where we're surrounded by love. Because that's really what it's about.
Yes.
And so this is not to endorse this program. This is not to endorse any program, but it is to say that in this world, we all need to find our mission, how we want to contribute to this world in a way that benefits other people, knowing that we're the big winners. It's a win-win. And also knowing that love matters. It truly does. So thank you guys for being here today.
Thank
so
you for
great.
having us.
I'm
Thank
so
you.
happy that you're here.
We're honored to have you.
And thank all of you for listening. And it's so great to be here with you. And we hope to see you again soon. And take care of yourselves. Have a great time. And see you next time. Bye-bye.